Welcome back to Naval Action and episode 46 of A Letter to the King. If you're new to the series, or perhaps you're one of the many players who've sort of put it aside for a little while and are thinking of coming back, this is my attempt to keep you up to date with what's happening on the Euro PvP 1 server as far as the Realm v Realm Biffo is concerned. And this week's episode is a special episode. It is the night flipping episode of Naval Action, where I'm going to get myself into all sorts of trouble by talking about what's going on with all of this so-called night flipping. Let's remind ourselves where we were last week. There was millions of port battles last week. The Spanish took Islamadora back off the US. The Brits finally cracked Trinidad on their 300th attempt. And the Americans made a move on Haiti with some dreaded night flipping, and there was quite a lot of other push and shove going on, but that was kind of the highlights. Now, the alliances, I'm prepared to say, are fixed. We've been through 28 days since the last time someone dropped out of an alliance, and the alliances now seem to end and restart appropriately on the 7-day timer. Now, I've said that, so we'll not fall out of an alliance, but we've done a full cycle of the US-Brit-Dutch alliance and a full cycle of the Frenchy, Spanish, Dane and Swede alliance. So, hurrah! I think the alliances are fixed, so well done, devs. Well, what's been going on this week? Now, I have had a bit of feedback. I've had lots of feedback, actually. Of various shades, 50 shades of feedback, but I don't always tell the port attacks in the precise order that they occurred, and normally that's because I'm trying to theme a bit of a story or weave a thread or whatever. So I'm mostly going to try and do it in order this week, although I have deliberately pulled a couple out for my own reasons. And the week kicked off around Novartis de Prancer Pack or something, where the Spanish had a go at the pirates. Now, I have to say, I've got absolutely no intel on this, other than the pirates valiantly defended. And that's about all I know. The Brits then had a go at Les Cays, and to some extent this was started what has become maybe the new meta in naval action, and I'll talk about this a little bit more next week perhaps. But what the Brits encountered here, and when I say it's the French, it's not really the French, it's these days, and it's very good to see, it's almost always a combined alliance fleet. Swedes, French, Danes and Spaniards. I think this one was mostly the former three. And what we saw here very, very quickly was that the Swede, French in particular was set up with some hardcore boarding ships, and the Brits lost ships real quick, 3 or 4 ships real quick, to heavily modded boarding ships. And in these port battles where you have to dominate circles, if you lose 3 or 4 ships early, you're going to struggle, and the Brits did struggle, and in the end were well beaten by the Frenchies. I have to also point out that I don't know what's been going on this week, but there's been lots of disconnects going on. And I've been in 3 port battles where the attacker, the defenders seem to have disconnects too, but the problem is that when the attackers log back in, they log in at the end battle screen. So we lost a couple of guys who DC'd and then got capped, so such is life, it is made of poop sometimes. But we also, essentially they showed us escaped when they didn't. And something else that I'm seeing more and more of is, again, in 3 port battles this week, people have joined the port battle, and these are either noobs or knobs, and they've joined and then instantly left, or they've joined, pretended to participate, sit just outside a circle, making you think you've got numbers to take it, and then 20 minutes later disconnect. So I actually don't have a problem with alts, spying, pretending to be British to get the intel, following fleets around. What I do have a problem is when they instigate tags to sort of take advantage of the rather silly ROE at the moment. But I have a real problem of where they enter a port pretending to be a Brit and then leaving. Now, I know in one of the 3 cases, the person accused has said, no, I just joined in. I chose not to talk to anybody and realised I was in the wrong ship and left. But in 2 other scenarios, it's highly suspicious behaviour. So nobody should do this. I don't accuse the defenders of organising it whatsoever. I am a little suspicious when the offending ship sits within shooting range of half a dozen friendlies and they don't do anything about it. But anyway, let's knock it on the head, everybody. I'm not accusing anybody. I'm not saying this is done by any particular nation. I'm saying in general, if you've got an alt, don't be a twat and enter the port battle as if you're a friendly and then do stuff all or surrender your ship or whatever. All right, the game's got enough problems without twattery. So let's knock that on the head. A bit later on in the week, the Dutch had a go at Caracas. Now, actually, they had 2 goes. The first time it was repelled. The second time was a bit of a no-show. I think the folks who set it up then decided they couldn't get there in time. However, the French are still clinging on to this little bit of real estate down here. And 2 Dutch attacks, both repelled, so lots and lots of ships and paints of the Frenchies. The Swedes were once again attacked at Port-au-Prince by the pirates. This is becoming a bit of a weekly event. I don't actually have a report on this either, I'm sorry to say, other than to tell you that the Swedes valiantly defended and got lots of ships and paint. Now, the Spanish were then attacked. Now, this wasn't a night flip, this was a brunch flip. So this would have been 11 a.m. Spanish time, and this port was defended by 22 mixed Spanish, Dutch, French, Swedish commanders, and it was attacked by a Australian bunch of captains. And despite the fact the Spanish were 3-ship deficit, they will say it's 4, but one of the ships that joined the British pretended to be British and wasn't, and that was very naughty. And this wasn't an accident. He sat next to the circle, didn't speak to anybody, and then as soon as we poked him and he wasn't on TeamSpeak, as soon as we challenged him, he just logged off and has never spoken to anybody again. So I accuse you with little evidence other than your behaviour of being a twat. However, the Brits still had the numbers. They still had a 3-ship advantage. Now, this is the one where there was lots of DCs, but that's not what cost the Brits the port at all. It was excellent defending. Again, we got boarded left, right and centre. In our defence, I would say 12 to 15 of our captains had never fought in one of the new port battles. There was a bit of salt thrown for the time of the attack. So like I say, this is like 11 o'clock on a weekday. There seemed to be a bunch of people there, although I did hear somebody had to miss the dentist in order to defend it, so that's perhaps no good. And it just does bring up a topic. Can the Aussies ever attack a port without being accused of cheating? We'll get to this in the night flip extravaganza in the sealed section of A Letter to the King later on. However, the Spanish and their allies, it really was an ally, they kicked the ass of the Brits. There's no other way of putting it. They boarded 5 or 6 ships and sank 13 or 14 others. So they absolutely slapfested the Brits. We really enjoyed ourselves because there was a whole bunch of new players giving it a go, giving it laldy. But chatting to a couple of the enemies after the battle, they were a bit pissed that we were attacking at this time. And we'll come to this malarkey later on. Well done. Well done. The Brits then had a go at Orinoco. This was the 2nd or 3rd attempt at Orinoco. Now, Orinoco is an interesting port. It's one of those ones that has 3 circles in a line. The Brits sent in their first screening fleet and felt they'd cleared the path when, out of nowhere, a French fleet magically appeared just in front of the port, as if it had logged on. Maybe it didn't, but it was as if it had logged on. And perhaps the person in the basic cutter sailing in the middle of our fleet had sort of said, you better log on. But I'm not saying that happened, but it did. And this force, now the Brits still managed to get in, but they entered too far away. And in one of these 3 circle ports, it meant the enemy had 2 circles instantly, and the Brits were a ship down, and so they never contested the 3rd circle with numbers. I managed to get myself, I was caught up in some screening, I managed to get myself actually ready to join the battle, but after 23 minutes, which is almost the fastest you can win a port battle on circle points, the battle was over. So for now, Sweden, you have defended us, but we'll be back to Orinoco. It's actually a really challenging port to take. It's a 4th rate, and because it's in narrow straits with 3 circles, I'll maybe show the map next week. It's a real biffo zone. It's a good one for fire ships, which I feel as though the Swedes and the French have perfected. And it's a good one for boarding, because these big ships, even though this is a 4th rate port, they're really not made to fight inside a circle, you know. So you're always turning through the wind, which gives people the opportunity to ram you, put you into the wind, and in 4th rates, potentially gold marine you. I met some gold marines just outside of Belize earlier in the week, and that didn't end well at all for me. So it's a really hard port to take, and despite some rather suspicious behaviour, the Brits did manage to make it in, but the defending fleet, which again was a hybrid and mixed fleet, absolutely spanketated it on points. The Brits started too far away. Perhaps if they got into the 1st circle and managed to have some numbers in there, or the wind had been in their favour, the wind was pretty much neutral for this one, it was kind of blowing across the circles, they might have had a chance to elongate the battle. The Brits did have a couple of good fire ships, but it didn't really matter in the end because they didn't kill the ships they damaged. I think probably 4 of the defending ships got what you might call disabled. Later in the week, the Brits were dual attacked at Belize, which for many is their home port, and once again at St. Lucie. Now in both of these, this was French led, this was Spanish led. In both of these, the screeners did their job. I think 4 Frenchies managed to make it in to St. Lucie, so that didn't last long. I think they all escaped. And the Spanish, although I don't think they lost a ship, they never made it in to Belize. There's a lot of folks, like I say, on the Brit side of things who put up at Belize. So even if you like, the organised clans were focusing here, and the Dutch are always willing to help the Brits screen over here. In fact, the British screen is almost always led by Dutchy, who leads with military precision. Over here, you're just going to have a real handbag of "you're not taking my port" guys, using every ship available to block entrance to the port and then defend the port should any attackers get through. And then that brings us really to the weekly go for Islamodora, but this time it was defended. It was actually the Dutch who agitated. I haven't seen the screen for this. This was this morning, but whatever happened, the Spanish valiantly defended. Well done, paints and ships for everybody. Now, one of the ones I'm doing out of order, or the one I've done out of order, is the Americans attacked. Let me just get the port name right so I don't get myself into trouble. Give me a moment. Cumana, which is also a rather terrible spice. And they did it at knobhead o'clock. For the defenders, and I think the defenders, now whether or not they stick to this, but in the forums they've said if you attack us at knobhead o'clock, we're not playing. So the Americans now have a foothold down here, and the Swedes have been vanquished, much weakening the French, Swedish, Danish, Spanish alliance on the South American mainland, down now to just 2 holdings. And I know they'll be attacked again this week. So this brings me to talk about NightFlipping. This rather splendid picture, I think it's very pretty. Let's talk about NightFlipping. So firstly, it's not NightFlipping, all right? And the reason it's not NightFlipping is this. Europe, at the moment, around 600 players on at peak, which incidentally it's actually slightly over 600 on at peak, which is incidentally up from pre-Christmas. The US peak time, which is 2 to 4 a.m. Euro time, is about 300 players on at peak, slightly higher during the weekends. And then the Aussies, we're not even on the sodding map, there's about 200 odd on at peak, which is 10 to noon European time. Now, tragically, and I blame Columbus for making the world round, what this means is that it's not night for everybody at the same time. Now, we're essentially on a global server, and the devs haven't said anything different. They don't geo-block. We all paid the same amount of money. So if you're an Aussie, American, or a French person, you all paid about the same amount of money. You all deserve content. So as much as I have sympathy with, say, the French saying, I don't want people attacking me before I've finished my dinner and after I've gone to bed, this is when a good lump of other players are playing. And they paid the same amount of money. So one person's night is another person's day. So night flipping's not really night flipping. It's just global servers. The problem is the alliances are made up of a group who fundamentally play between 7 and midnight European time against an alliance that's got coverage in both the US and Oceanic time. So of the 300 on at peak here, you could easily say 2/3 of the British-American Dutch alliance, and in the Australian time, again, perhaps 3/4, maybe not 3/4, 2/3 again, are awake. So the Euros on at this time are people who are off work, a day off school, don't work, don't go to school, or have pulled a sickie. So the sun never sets on a global server. Now what can we do about this? What's the answer, Jeheil, you smart ass? Well, let's just assume for a moment the intent is for a global server, because if the intent is for purely regional servers, night flipping goes away as a problem, because you won't have, well, it doesn't go away as a problem, but it wouldn't be such a prodigious problem. You'd still have sneaky bastards who woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning from France to attack people from Britain and vice versa. Now, we could wait for a magic solution from the devs, and you know, this can be lots of things. It could be incentives for new players to join weaker nations to buff up weaker nations' player base. It could be a sort of, like we spoke about last week, a combination of you kick off hostility, but the battle can only commence within a time zone set by the defender. And it could be 10 other things. It could be port battles now consist of 5 events in different time zones. Who knows? Who knows? However, for the next 60 days, which is a long time in naval action, we're not going to have a patch that fixes this. And even when they do patch it, it might not fix it enough. So what do? We have 4 options. We can carry on hurling poop at each other in the forums and in chat and in battle chat and in general, and we can come up with reasons to justify doing what we're doing. Now, I have to first of all make a bit of an apology. I've, in the last 2 letters to the King, referred to the Danes breaking the Christmas truce, and this is because I very much got the impression the Danes did break the Christmas truce, but it has been drawn to my attention that according to the written wording of the truce, the Danes could indeed raise hostility during the Christmas days that they said they didn't have enough players on to defend. And the fact that they did, and the fact that they then hit 3 American ports while the Americans were out of the alliance, was not a transgression of the treaty as they saw it. However, and that's the position of the Danes, and I maybe relayed it as if it was a fact that the Danes broke the Christmas truce. From the Danish perspective, they didn't break the Christmas truce. From the American perspective, they did. There was conversations in TeamSpeak and promises made and all sorts of things like this that not everyone was party to, and the Americans felt the Danes transgressed, and the Americans are hurting them now by attacking them at 2 o'clock in the morning. And they're doing this as well because they believe they have a right to attack in their prime time, which just happens to be 2 o'clock in the morning for the Danes. So we could carry on. If you read many of the forum posts, it's the same conversation going on, round and round and round, like monkeys hurling poop at each other, referring to transgressions that happened 6 months ago and so on and so forth. Ooh, the Danes did this with the pirates and so on and so forth. And we can carry on doing that. I'm sure we're capable of doing that. We could, and hats off here to the Danes, they did attempt to do this agreement, but it basically said to the Americans, you can't attack us except for on the weekends. And the Americans said, but I don't understand, it's I pay the same as you, why can't I attack you when I want to? So, but we could make a gentleman's agreement. Perhaps the Americans could be limited to a certain amount of attacks. Perhaps there's certain areas of the map which we would consider time zone free. I don't know. We could just suck it up. It's kind of like the first one, except for we don't moan about it and we just live with it. And we don't get as attached to our pixel ports. Or we could change the alliances. And this isn't my idea. This is most of these I've sort of distilled from conversations. This is actually from a rather well-known Swedish captain who doesn't actually even participate in most of the RVR stuff. But we could change alliances. This isn't necessarily what we should do, but it's an example. We could swap the US for the Danes. Sometimes when I used to go drinking, there'd be one of us that was really drunk, and you'd be carrying him home. And on occasion, we'd meet another group of guys who had really drunk, and just for fun, we'd swap the drunk guys. So we'd get their drunk guy, and they'd get our drunk guy, and later on, it was very, very funny and disturbing. But we could swap the US for the Danes. This would mean that the French, Swedes and Spanish would have attack and defence potential for that time slot. And the Brits have got a good enough coverage to make up for the loss of the US. Because at the moment, essentially, the British being in the same alliance as the US double downs on the port, the port time zones, if you like, because you've got probably the broadest coverage of all in the British nation, coupled up with a growing, and I'm really happy to see the US now being able to field a competent, well-organised, solid 25-man fleet. I actually enjoy sailing with the US. So for me, these are the only 4 options we can do until the devs come up with a magic solution. Now, which one will we do? Well, this, if past behaviour is the best predictor for the future behaviour, this is what we'll do. We'll just carry on hurling poop at each other, and I suspect the server numbers will not swell as well as they could. I also think that the angst shown amongst us all, and I have been part of this, I suppose, will just entrench itself more and more. So, from a game perspective, the alliances we see now, because of the poo throwing, everyone bands together and buddies up, and it might end up more intractable than it ever has been before. Now, we've tried gentleman agreements before. There was, if you remember, at the end or the middle of the Second War, there was the Rainbow Coalition of the Dolphin, Unicorn and Care Bear Alliance Agreement that tried to protect Spain, who didn't need protection. God forbid they definitely didn't need protection. And it created a few areas where there was some no-go for RVR and a few areas where it was anyone can do anything. That kind of worked, but proved very unsuccessful in the eyes of many players. They all felt about it's war, you can't put silly rules on war. I also think that the angst between some of the nations is probably too great to expect any gentleman's agreement to hold for more than a day. And you know, it only takes half a dozen captains not to agree, and they can cause enough mess to break the agreement, and we've seen that before with so-called rogue clans. The suck it up princess and live with it solution is kind of doing what we do now, but been less tetchy about it and less tied to our pixel ports. Now, this would be quite a mature thing to do, but I actually don't think it would work for this reason. If you don't care about your ports, it lowers the reason for you to log on. I mean, one of the hardest things about the night flips is, up until recently, the folks who are predominantly European time zone based have been waking up at 3 a.m. to defend their ports. They love their ports. They would rather not sleep. They would rather not go to work. They would rather not go to the dentist. They would rather piss their wife off for a week than give up their pixel ports. Now, take that ridiculous love for our pixel ports away from us, and maybe the game doesn't mean as much to us, and then we all bugger off and start playing Dota and World of Warships and other stupid things like that. So, I don't really think this is a solution. I think this, not necessarily the US for the Danes, it could be the Brits for the Danes, it could be the Spanish for the US. This is actually the best chance we have of a player-based solution until our darling devs fix things. But I think we're really unlikely to do this because of the angst that's been created up here. As a community, I mean, I know, for example, the Swedes at the end of the second generation of wars on this server switched from the successful alliance they'd been in to join another alliance where they were with their nemesis' eyes. They were with their arch enemies, but they switched. And I dare say they got more content because of it. And, may I add, when, say, the Brits or the Dutch come up against the Swedes, there's a lot less piss and vinegar in the water. There's a lot more 07 and well done chaps going on, because they were once allies. So I actually think, shockingly enough, this is the right solution. Not necessarily US for Danes, that's an example. But either the US goes over to the baddies and we get one of the baddies on our side, or the Brits go over to the baddies, God forbid, and the US and Dutch get one of the baddies. So I really think that's the only way, until a magic dev solution comes along, that we will get a better spread of gameplay. Now, there'll still be night flipping, as people call it. There's no such thing as night flipping. There'll still be night flipping, but you should have coverage, better coverage, that perhaps only puts people out a little bit rather than completely puts them out. Anyway, my thinking is that the Brits and the US can't be on the same alliance for us to have this problem. But I think that's highly unlikely to change because we love each other and we work we work well together. But stranger things have happened. Now, where will the Biffo be next week at 4 a.m. in your neighbourhood? There'll always be a bit of friction around this neck of the woods. The Live Oak Coast will be a horrible area of piracy, and I'm sure Islamabad will get another tickle. Haiti is the new war zone. The Americans just set up a 2 a.m. flip for Ponce. The Danes turned up and defended Ponce last time, despite saying they wouldn't. Wouldn't surprise me if they do again. They like Ponce for some reason. And the goodies, or the British, Dutch, US alliance, I think will carry on trying to get rid of the French, Swede alliance, Spanish and Dane alliance from the coast to South America proper. So I suspect that Orinoco, whichever one that is, I'm not going to get it wrong, so you'll annoy me, will come under more pressure. And of course the Frenchies will push to get some of these back. So what's happened on the tally of splinters, sail and blood? Not much. The Americans snaffled up some midnight snacks from the Swedes, who've fallen down the table. The Americans, this is probably the highest number of ports I remember the Americans seeing. The Spanish are still Uno. But there you go. So that's it for this week's night flipping naval action. Hope you enjoyed it. I hope it gave you some thoughts. I hope I set the record a little bit straight with the a more balanced view at the night flipping post Christmas deals. Give us a like, give us a subscribe. I'll see you on the ocean, and you'll probably board me.